Hey everybody, it's wedding week here at Maple Fork Lodge, and before things get too crazy, my daughter just got in last night with her fiance and a bunch of friends, and things are about to get real here coming up to the weekend. I'm just taking a few moments early this morning to have a cup of coffee out here on the porch and thank God for children who want to get married and produce grandbabies. All of my grandchildren will be here this week, and that is a real special thing. Doesn't happen very often, so we're very grateful for that. But I wanted to talk to you for just a minute about what's going on between Israel and the Houthis. It appears that the war has escalated in that now the Israelis have struck directly at the Houthis, and the Houthis have successfully struck at the Israeli homeland. And so, to back up, if you haven't been watching the news, the Houthis have been launching hundreds of missiles and rockets and drones at Israel since October 7th, but none of them managed to actually penetrate Israeli airspace until just last weekend. And they did so successfully by sending a long-range missile drone, suicide drone, that flew more than 1,400 kilometers from Yemen across the Red Sea, flew up northern Africa, across Eritrea and Egypt, and out over the Mediterranean, and then turned right and struck Tel Aviv, missed the U.S. consulate in Tel Aviv by about 100 feet, I'm told, but ended up striking a apartment complex, killing one 50-year-old Israeli man and wounding about 10 other people. The Israelis have obviously been planning for this for some time, figuring that it would eventually happen, because they struck back very quickly at Yemen, at the Houthis, in much less time than it would have taken them to come up with something off the cuff. So if they had not already been planning a strike against the Houthis, it would have taken them a lot longer to do it. But they struck back right away by absolutely obliterating the Houthi port at Hodeidah. Now, this is a very important port for Yemen and for Iran. There have been any number of ships coming and going that are bringing contraband, things that are sanctioned items, out of Iran or taking them into Iran, stopping at the port of Hodeidah. Some of those items have been military equipment that was sent from Iran into Yemen. This will make it more difficult for the Yemenis to make use of or to offload that stuff, although that was the intent. They mostly struck, it looks like, about $600 million worth of fuel oil that was stored at the port, made for a very fiery explosion, and it certainly caused fuel prices to spike in Yemen. But that's, as far as the Houthi government is concerned, that's not necessarily a bad thing in the short term, because the Houthi government has a complete monopoly on the sale of petroleum products, and if the prices go up, then what they have left they're going to make more money on. But eventually it's going to get difficult for them to have enough fuel to do what they need to do, but that will affect the civilians in Yemen first, more than the military government of the Houthis. Now, this is an important point, because the port is a dual use item. It can be used for military purposes, or it could be used for civilian purposes. And it was obviously being used for both. The difficulty is that the people in Yemen have been starving for more than a decade. And it's been really the worst humanitarian crisis on planet Earth for much of that time. So by striking the port and making it more difficult to offload everything, the Israelis are going to increase the suffering of the people somewhat. Now, there are other ports where they can bring stuff in, and they didn't actually strike the part of the port where they would bring bulk carriers in with things like wheat and barley and stuff like that. And they didn't strike the cranes. Well, apparently the cranes that they struck, that they destroyed, were probably not working anyway. And so when they bring in ships, they can offload the ships with the cranes on the ships themselves. It just takes a little bit longer. And so they didn't completely put the port out of commission. But you are going to hear from the mainstream media, and specifically from the Houthis, that, the Israelis are trying to genocide people in Yemen because they're cutting off their supply of food. That's not actually true. The food can still get in. It's just going to take a little more time to offload it. And really, the Houthis, just like the Hamas terrorist organization, they have a complete control over the food supplies and everything else that comes in through that port. And they don't mind one bit causing civilian suffering in order to accomplish their goals. They're very similar to Hezbollah and Hamas and other terrorist organizations in that way. See, here in the West, the government's job is to stand between us and our enemies and protect us and keep us from having to suffer at the hands of our enemies. In countries like Yemen, and countries that are defined by what they hate, not by what they love, the government has no problem at all hiding behind its people and using its people for its own ends politically. That's exactly what you're seeing in Yemen, and it's what you're seeing in Gaza, and it's what you're seeing in Lebanon. And so the people suffer there not because of the actions of Israel. Israel wouldn't have to be taking any actions against Yemen if Yemen wasn't firing hundreds of rockets and drones and missiles at them. So just like the fault of every death in Gaza, every bit of suffering in Gaza is right at the feet of Hamas, the fault of the suffering of the people in Yemen lays right at the feet of the Houthis, and anybody who tells you otherwise is selling something, or is just completely disingenuous, and you shouldn't listen to those people. Now, this went about. This was the right thing to do by half. The Israelis struck the port. They didn't put the port out of commission. They made a spectacular splash. They made it look real good. But in the long run, it's not going to have that much of effect on the war. It only just solidifies the Houthis' ability to play the victim and to go out and beg for help from other Arab countries, some of which they've actually attacked in the past, like Saudi Arabia and the UAE. And they're probably not going to get a lot of sympathy from those countries. But in the international press, especially in the West, what you're going to see is this demonizing of Israel for doing anything to try to protect its people. Because, you're causing suffering in Yemen. No, they're not causing suffering in Yemen. The Houthis are causing suffering in Yemen. There wouldn't be this back and forth if the Houthis didn't shoot rockets and missiles and drones at Israel. So keep in mind who's at fault here, and don't listen to what the mainstream media says or the UN says. Again, their entire goal is to just destroy the state of Israel. They would like to see it not exist, and that's not going to happen anytime soon. So that's all we have there. There's a whole lot more to it than that, but I just wanted to make a short video about this to help you kind of understand where we're at, and that this does not end the conflict between Israel and Yemen. It may actually increase it for a time, but this is exactly what Israel needs to be doing. They need to be striking very, very hard. And by the way, striking without consulting the United States or asking their permission, because that sends a message to their enemies that we will do what we have to do. And the only thing that savages understand is violence. So if you're going to speak to them, if you're going to try to get a message through to savages, you have to speak to them with violence. And that goes for Hamas, that goes for the Houthis, and it goes for Hezbollah. All right. Have a good day. We'll see you later.